It was September of 2017, and I was 35 at the time. I'd been working construction jobs on and off for the last decade, mostly in the Northeast, but that year I was down south helping a buddy run a small renovation crew in Alabama. The work wasn't great, the pay wasn't steady, and I was just plain burned out. So one weekend, I decided to drive a few hours north and get away from everything for a few days. I picked a spot in the Talladega National Forest. Nothing too deep or extreme, just off a forestry road that looked like it didn't get much traffic. I'd marked the location on an old topographic map that I'd had folded up in my glove box for years. It showed a ridge near an old logging trail that looped into a creek basin. Looked peaceful enough. I wanted quiet, trees, and maybe some small game to cook over a fire. I wasn't going hunting seriously, just bringing my .22 rifle for squirrels or rabbits. Mostly, I just wanted to sit alone and breathe a little. The drive took most of the morning. I filled up in a little town called Heflin, grabbed some jerky, a six-pack, and a couple cans of soup. Then I headed down a series of forest roads until I found the spot I'd circled months ago. It was a thin stretch of gravel off a main trail, just wide enough for my truck to pull halfway into the woods. I parked there around noon and hiked in another 20 minutes with my gear. The forest was damp already, leaves slick, mud soft underfoot. It had rained lightly the night before, and everything smelled like wet bark and soil. There were no clear signs of anyone else being around. No boot prints, no trash. Just the sound of wind through the upper branches and the distant tap of water dripping off limbs. I found a small clearing with enough space to pitch my tent between two hickory trees. About 50 feet off, the land sloped down toward a wide creek. The water wasn't deep, more like a steady stream, but it would be enough to fill my bottles and maybe rinse off if I got sweaty. I set up camp slowly, took my time, staked the tent, laid out a tarp, stacked some firewood. The quiet made everything feel slower than usual. My phone had no service out here, and I turned it off and zipped it into my backpack. I didn't want to hear it buzz. By the time I was done settling in, the clouds were already building again. Thick and dark, you could feel the weight in the air, the way the woods seemed to hold their breath before a storm. I didn't mind. I liked rain when I camped. Kept people away, and if your gear was decent, it could be cozy. I had a good tent, dry bags, plenty of food. I grabbed my rifle and walked down toward the creek to see if anything was moving. I wasn't expecting to hunt right away, but I figured it couldn't hurt to scout. The woods were full of noise, birds, bugs, frogs, but no movement that looked like game. I crouched for a while by a fallen log and listened. Somewhere upstream, something heavy moved through the undergrowth, but I couldn't see it. Probably a deer or a raccoon. I stayed low for another 20 minutes, then wandered back to camp. The rain started just after sundown, came fast and steady, drumming on the tarp over my fire pit. I'd gotten a fire going just before it hit, and I managed to keep it alive by building a small cover out of flat stones and branches. It smoked like hell but burned enough to heat my soup. I sat on my rolled-up sleeping bag, spooning the soup straight from the can, listening to the downpour thicken around me. The first weird thing happened after dark, sometime around 8 or 9 p.m. It had been raining hard for over an hour by then, and the forest was all noise, wind, water, the hiss of trees shifting. But suddenly it just cut out. Not everything, but enough that I noticed. Like a section of the woods had gone mute. No frogs, no birds, just the tap of water and the soft creak of the trees. It wasn't like in movies where everything goes dead silent all at once. But there was a weird shift. The air felt thicker. I sat still for a few minutes, bowl of soup half finished, and tried to figure out what it was. Sometimes animals sense a predator and go quiet. Maybe a coyote or bobcat was prowling nearby. I had a flashlight on me, one of those big mag lights, and I swept it slowly along the tree line. Nothing, just brush and dark shapes. The light caught raindrops like sparks, but there was no sign of anything moving. I stayed awake for another hour, trying to read with my headlamp, but the pages kept getting damp, and my focus kept drifting back to the woods. I felt watched, not constantly, not every second, but off and on, like something was out there and had already seen me before I even thought to look for it. Eventually, I gave up and climbed into my tent. The rain was steady on the fabric, and the sound was calming at first. I stretched out in my sleeping bag and listened. The night dragged on. At some point, maybe close to midnight, I heard a single sound that didn't fit. A snap, like a branch breaking, not from wind or weight, but stepped on. It was close. I sat up fast, every part of me suddenly awake. I clicked off my headlamp and waited. My rifle was by the entrance flap, just within reach. My tent zipper was pulled closed, but not locked. I leaned forward, holding my breath, ears straining over the sound of the rain. Another step, then nothing. I waited 10 minutes without moving, then 20, then 40. No more sounds. My eyes stayed wide open the whole time, even though there was nothing to see. I don't think I slept that night. Not really. I dozed off sometime after 3 a.m., but even in sleep, I was half aware of every crackle, every gust of wind, every distant splash. The woods were alive, but I didn't feel part of them. I felt like I was intruding. The next morning was gray and wet. My boots were damp, my fire would soak through. I boiled water for coffee and sat under the tarp, trying to make sense of the night. I told myself it was probably just a deer, maybe a feral hog, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it had come too close. No animal gets that close to a burning fire unless it's used to people, or unless it's desperate. I debated packing up and leaving right then, but part of me was stubborn. I'd driven all the way out here to clear my head, and I wasn't about to run off because of a broken branch and some bad weather. I stayed another day. The rain let up around noon, and I hiked further along the ridge, thinking maybe I'd scout a new place to set up camp the next night. I didn't see anyone. No people, no footprints. Just mud, leaves, rocks. Then I found something that made my stomach twist. About 100 yards uphill from my tent, near a dead pine, I saw an old lean-to. Not one built by forest rangers, but homemade. Sloppy, branches lashed with twine, half collapsed from age and weather. Inside, just some leaves, a rusted coffee can, and what looked like the remains of a fire pit. It hadn't been used recently, maybe not for years, but it hadn't decayed the way things usually did out here. Something about it felt paused, like someone had walked away and meant to come back. I took a few steps back, scanning the ground around it. No fresh prints, no recent trash, but I did notice some broken branches further up the hill. The kind you get when someone pushes through heavy brush. I didn't follow them. Instead, I went back to camp, slowly, checking over my shoulder the whole way. That night, the rain came back harder than before. Sheets of water slammed the tarp so loud I couldn't even hear myself think. I didn't bother with a fire. I just stayed inside my tent with the rifle across my lap, staring at the door flap. I knew I wouldn't sleep. Not now. Around 1 a.m., I heard something again. Not a step, not a branch, but a wet, dragging sound, like someone pulling a log across the mud. I held still. The noise stopped. Then, a minute later, I heard it again. Closer. Drag. Pause. Drag. I held my breath so long it hurt. Then it was gone. Just the rain. By morning, the trail near my tent was smeared. Not footprints, not tire marks. Just one wide path of flattened grass and mud, like something had been moved. I packed up everything as fast as I could. Didn't eat, didn't make coffee. Just shoved my gear into my pack, took one last look at the trail, and left. I didn't stop until I hit pavement. My boots were soaked. My shoulders were raw from the pack straps. and I could still feel that dragging sound in the back of my skull. I never found out what it was. I didn't go to the rangers. I didn't tell anyone, not even my buddy back in Alabama. What would I say? That the woods felt wrong? That something watched me all night? A few weeks later, I looked up the area again out of curiosity. There was a report online about an old logging camp up near that ridge, abandoned decades ago. A few vagrants had squatted there over the years. One guy had gone missing back in 2012. No signs, no body. I haven't gone camping since. Not alone, not in the rain, especially not near that ridge. Because I don't know what I almost saw or what almost saw me. But I know it didn't want to be seen, and I don't think it ever left. I was 36 when I decided to take a solo camping trip through northern Utah. It was late August 2014. I had been working a desk job in Salt Lake City for almost 9 years, spending too many hours staring at spreadsheets and avoiding sunlight. I had started to feel like a passenger in my own body, like I was watching myself live a life I didn't really choose. I needed a break. No phones, no screens, just me, a backpack, and the quiet of nature. I planned a 4-day loop through a lesser-known trail system east of Ogden. I found it online through a hiking forum where people share hidden gem routes. One user had posted about a rugged section that looped around a remote ridge and connected several old campsites. It was described as overgrown but doable with a map and compass. That sounded perfect. Less people, more peace. I packed everything I'd need: tent, stove, food, water filter, extra socks, and a detailed topographic map printed on waterproof paper. I marked a route with red pencil and folded it to fit in my coat pocket. I also carried a small notebook, something I'd gotten in the habit of doing after a therapist suggested writing things down when I got anxious. I wasn't expecting to use it, but it was there, just in case. Day 1 went as planned. I parked my car at a small gravel lot near an old trailhead, locked everything inside, and set off into the woods. The path wound through pines and aspen, rising steadily uphill. The weather was warm, not too hot, and the only sounds were birds, the breeze, and the crunch of my boots on the dirt. I passed a couple other hikers early on, older folks with walking poles, and then nothing but trees for hours. I made camp near a small creek and boiled some noodles on my stove. There were mosquitoes, but nothing unbearable. I wrote a few lines in the notebook, mostly just to remind myself where I'd set up. I fell asleep to the sound of water trickling over rocks. Day 2, I pushed deeper into the forest, where the trail began to get narrower. I followed the route I'd marked carefully, using the compass to keep myself oriented. Around midday, I came across an old campsite with a rusty fire ring and a broken bench made from logs. I took a short break there, snacked on some trail mix, and continued. The trees got denser after that, and the sunlight faded into long green shadows. The ground turned soft and uneven, like it hadn't been walked on in years. I started to wonder how often people actually came through here. The map still matched my surroundings, but it didn't say anything about the sudden drop-off I hit late in the afternoon. A steep slope that dropped into a narrow valley I hadn't noticed before. I stopped and pulled out the map. I was still on track, technically. The line I'd marked veered close to this dip in the terrain, but the contours made it hard to see how steep it really was. I had 2 choices: backtrack and camp higher up where it was flat, or follow the slope down and cut through the valley, which would meet the trail again on the other side. I decided to go down. It didn't look that bad, just slow. Halfway down, the slope got worse. Loose soil slid under my boots and I slipped more than once, landing hard and getting dirt in my sleeves and collar. Branches whipped at my face, and I had to grab at roots to keep myself steady. It took almost an hour to reach the bottom, where I finally found flat ground. I stood there, sweating and irritated, breathing heavily. The floor of the valley was narrow and shaded, full of fallen trees and moss. It smelled damp, like old leaves. I looked up to see how far I'd come and realized how steep the sides really were. Climbing back up would be hell. I kept moving forward, looking for the spot where the trail reconnected, but everything down there looked the same: gray bark, green moss, brown dirt. After another 20 minutes of searching, I realized something was off. I pulled out the map again, trying to match what I saw to the lines on paper, but nothing looked right. I couldn't find any of the markers or features I'd noted earlier. No large boulder, no fork in the trail, no sign of the ridge I was supposed to be climbing toward. I turned around to go back the way I came, but I couldn't even figure out which direction that was. Every side of the valley looked identical. That's when I started to feel it, that slow, sinking feeling in your gut when you realize you've made a serious mistake. I wasn't panicking yet, but I knew I needed to be careful. I checked my compass again and tried to walk north, thinking that would put me back on course. The ground stayed soggy and uneven, and the brush was thicker than before. I started seeing old tree stumps, some of them cut clean through. There had clearly been logging here probably decades ago. I pushed through undergrowth and climbed over trunks, looking for anything that resembled a trail. Then I saw something strange. About 20 feet to my right, in a small clearing between the trees, there was a wooden post sticking out of the ground. It was about chest high and looked weathered, like it had been there a long time. I walked over to it. A rusted metal loop stuck out from the top, like something meant to tie a rope through. There was nothing else around it, no signs, no paths, no markings, just that one post standing alone in the woods. I stood there for a while, trying to figure out what it meant. Maybe it was part of an old boundary line or fence. Couldn't be sure. I moved on, but I kept glancing back at it. It didn't feel right. I walked for what felt like another hour, trying to climb the valley wall again. It was slow going. I kept slipping and grabbing trees to pull myself up. The sun was dropping lower, and I still hadn't found the trail. I needed to stop and set up camp before it got dark. I found a semi-flat patch of dirt behind some rocks and pitched my tent there. I was too tired to cook, so I just ate an energy bar and drank from my filtered bottle. I made a note in the notebook about the strange post and where I thought I was, then zipped into my sleeping bag and tried to sleep. But I couldn't. The woods around me felt too quiet. Normally, you hear little things, crickets, frogs, rustling leaves. But that night, it was silent. Not peaceful silent, dead silent. The kind that makes your ears ring. I lay there for hours, staring at the tent ceiling, listening to the silence. I kept thinking about the post and wondering who had put it there, and why. I didn't remember seeing anything like that on the map. I didn't remember anyone on the forum mentioning old logging markers. Eventually, sometime past midnight, I dozed off. I woke up before sunrise to a strange sound. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp and distinct, like wood cracking. Not the natural kind, like a tree swaying. This was short, deliberate. I sat up and listened. Came again. Snap. Then again. A few steps away in the trees. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent slowly. I scanned the woods. Nothing. Just trees and low fog. I didn't see anything move, but I felt like something had. I didn't wait around. I packed everything up in a rush and started moving again, trying to get back on high ground. I walked fast, barely stopping, using the compass to stay north. I kept looking over my shoulder, even though I knew it was stupid. Just before noon, I found a piece of trail tape tied to a branch, neon pink, fluttering in the wind. My heart jumped. I followed it and found another one, then another. Eventually, the brush cleared out and I stepped back onto a dirt trail, narrow but real. Not the one I'd started on, but close enough. I followed it uphill for what felt like hours. Late that afternoon, I saw something up ahead, a structure hidden partially behind trees. As I got closer, I realized it was a small hunting shack or cabin. Old, made from gray wood with a sagging roof and no windows. I approached it slowly. The door was cracked open. I didn't go inside. There were signs of recent activity. Footprints in the dirt. A soda can lying near the door. A pair of boot tracks leading away from the shack and disappearing into the trees. I didn't want to meet whoever stayed there. I marked the location in my notebook and kept walking. Fast. I didn't stop until the sun was almost gone. I made camp farther up the ridge, on open ground with wide views in every direction. That night, I finally heard normal sounds again. Bugs, wind, distant owls. I felt like I was out of whatever weird pocket I had fallen into. The next morning, I found my way back to the original trail. I recognized a fork in the path and followed it downhill until I saw the gravel lot and my car. I didn't even stop to rest. I unlocked the door, threw my gear in the back, and drove until I hit pavement. I didn't feel fully relaxed until I was back on the freeway. I never posted about that trail online. I kept the map, though, with my red line and all the little notes scribbled in the margins. I also kept the notebook, even the pages that got smudged with dirt and sweat. Sometimes I take it out and read the part about the wooden post, trying to make sense of it. The strangest part wasn't getting lost. That happens. The strangest part was the feeling I couldn't shake. That I hadn't just wandered into the wrong part of the woods, but into a part someone didn't want me to find. And they had seen me before I ever saw them. I never went camping alone again after that. I always thought solo camping would help clear my head. That's why I started doing it in the first place. Just a way to get away from everything. I'd been working in an auto shop in Phoenix for 8 years by then, and it wasn't bad work, but it wore on me. The days were loud, hot, and full of grease, and I was tired of sweating under car hoods while pretending to care about whatever someone had Googled about their engine light. So once every month or two, I packed up my gear and drove north. I liked places where my phone didn't work, where I didn't hear tires screeching or people arguing. I liked it better when the only sounds were trees creaking in the wind or my boots crunching dirt. That October, I planned a 3-day solo trip to the Sick Greavves National Forest. I'd gone once before with a buddy and liked how isolated it felt. Not too touristy. Long stretches of gravel roads and endless trees. It had rained the week before, so I figured it'd be cool and quiet, just the way I liked it. I loaded my gear into my truck early Thursday morning. Tent, sleeping bag, gas stove, lanterns, food, water, and a few extras. I had this old military surplus map of the area too, really detailed stuff, down to old trails and logging roads that don't show up online. It was more useful than my GPS out there, so I kept it close. I left around 6 a.m. from the city, stopped once for gas and coffee, and then drove the rest of the way in silence. When I reached the forest boundary, I switched to 4-wheel drive and started crawling over dirt roads. My plan was to find a small clearing I'd marked the last time, about 5 miles down an overgrown trail that used to be a Forest Service route but hadn't been maintained in years. I found the turnoff, drove in slowly, scraping past brush and ducking under low branches. Eventually, I saw the same rock formation I remembered, 2 narrow slabs leaning together like a crooked tent. Just past that was a flat open space surrounded by trees. I parked and killed the engine. Everything went quiet, not even birds, just the distant whisper of wind through the branches. I set up camp quickly, pitched the tent, unrolled the sleeping bag, gathered firewood. The sun was already getting low, and the air turned sharp and chilly as it dropped. I had my fire going before dark and heated up a can of stew. That first night was peaceful, cold, but peaceful. I read by lantern light for a while and then climbed into my sleeping bag. The first weird thing happened the next morning. I'd gone for a hike around mid-morning, following a ridge I'd seen on the map. It wasn't too far, maybe a mile or two, but it gave me a good view of the forest and helped me get a sense of my surroundings. I brought my compass and a small day pack with snacks, water, and a cheap field knife. I didn't think I needed much. I stayed out for about 2 hours, then looped back toward camp. Everything looked normal. My truck was where I left it, my fire pit was cold, tent still standing. Nothing seemed off except my map was gone. I always kept it folded up inside the mesh pocket of my tent. I put it there the night before, but when I checked, the pocket was empty. I looked around the tent, then in my pack, then under my sleeping bag. I thought maybe I'd moved it and forgot, but it was just gone. I even walked around the site thinking maybe it had blown out and gotten stuck on a branch or something. But there was no wind that night, and I never saw a scrap of paper. I told myself I must have dropped it somewhere during the hike. I was annoyed, but not worried. I had a decent mental image of the area, and it wasn't like I was venturing too far from camp anyway. Still, it bugged me. That night, I didn't sleep as easily. I kept thinking about that map and where it could have gone. Part of me felt like I didn't lose it, like someone had taken it. But I pushed that thought down because it didn't make any sense. The second night was colder. I kept the fire burning longer and stayed up a while, just staring at the flames and listening. I still didn't hear much, just the normal stuff. Twigs snapping, trees shifting, maybe a few small animals moving through the brush. Around 1 a.m., I woke up needing to piss. I crawled out of my sleeping bag, threw on my jacket, and stepped outside with a flashlight. I walked a few yards from the tent, did my business, then paused a second to look around. That's when I noticed something in the dirt near the edge of the clearing. A line, like someone had dragged something across the ground. I pointed the flashlight at it. The line started maybe 30 feet from my tent and curved around toward the trees. I followed it with the light. It wasn't a clean drag. It looked like something heavy had been pulled, catching on roots and rocks. No clear footprints nearby, just that groove. I walked over to it, still half asleep. The line stopped near a tree, then vanished into thicker brush. I stood there for a long minute, flashlight flicking between the dirt and the trees. Everything was still. The only sound was the wind. I didn't hear any animals, no insects. That silence felt heavy. I turned around and went back to the tent, zipped it shut, and didn't fall asleep again for a long time. The next morning, I debated leaving early. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid. It's a forest, I thought. There's animals, fallen limbs, wind, erosion, all sorts of things that make weird lines in the dirt. But that didn't explain the missing map. I still couldn't shake that. I decided to do one last hike before I packed up, just a short loop toward a nearby creek. I brought my small day pack again, this time including a heavier knife I kept in the truck. I also tucked in a flare gun from my emergency kit, just in case. I didn't think I'd need it, but after a weird night, it felt better to be cautious. The hike took me away from the clearing and deeper into the trees. The air was cold and damp. Everything was quieter than I remembered, even for a forest.
No birds, no insects.
Just my own breathing and the sound of my boots crunching dirt and leaves. I reached the creek around noon. It was low, trickling over rocks, but clean. I filled one bottle and sat down on a flat stone. I didn't stay long. Something felt wrong. Not fear exactly, more like the sense that I wasn't alone. I kept checking behind me, scanning the trees. Nothing moved, but that feeling stuck. So I stood up, slung my pack over my shoulder, and started heading back. I took a slightly different route on the return. That's when I saw it. About 30 yards off the trail, in a patch of thinning trees, was a small pile of rocks. Not natural ones. These were stacked, carefully, like someone had taken the time to make a little tower. On top of the rocks, folded neatly, was my map. I stared at it for a long time. No part of me wanted to go near it, but I did. I moved slowly, scanning the woods as I walked. When I reached the pile, I didn't touch the map right away. I knelt down, looked at the rocks, at the ground around it. There were faint footprints, not boots, bare feet. Narrow, thin, almost delicate, but clearly human. They circled the pile once and then vanished back into the trees. I took the map. It was damp and smelled faintly of dirt, but otherwise fine. I didn't refold it. I stuffed it into my jacket pocket and turned around. I walked fast, not quite running, but close. I kept checking over my shoulder. I didn't see anyone, but I knew then that someone else had been in the forest with me. Someone who'd come into my camp, taken my map, and left it like some kind of offering or warning. Back at camp, I didn't waste time. I tore down the tent, packed everything, tossed gear into the truck with no care for order. I left some things behind, my folding chair, part of the firewood, even my book. I didn't want to stay another minute. I started the engine, backed out of the clearing, and drove hard down the trail, branches screeching against the paint. I didn't stop until I hit paved road. I pulled over once I had signal, texted a buddy to say I was coming back early, then kept driving until I reached a small motel south of Flagstaff. That night, I slept with the light on and my knife under my pillow. I've never gone back to that part of the forest. I still camp sometimes, but never alone, and I never leave anything outside my tent. That map's locked in a storage box now, and I don't look at it much. But sometimes, when I do, I still see the faint water stains from where it sat on those rocks. And I remember those narrow footprints circling like something out of place, like a message. No one believed me when I told them. They said I probably dropped the map and some animal messed with it. But animals don't fold paper. They don't stack rocks in careful piles. And they don't walk barefoot through cold October woods. Whoever it was, they didn't try to hurt me, but they knew I was there. They watched me. They walked into my camp. They followed me, and they wanted me to know it. That was enough, and I'm never going back. It was October 2016 when I decided to take a solo hunting trip up to northern Idaho. I was 31 at the time, living in Spokane, Washington, working long shifts at a metal fabrication shop. Hunting was something I'd grown up doing with my dad and uncles, but over the years, after Dad passed, I started going alone. There was something about the silence of the woods, the clean air, the focus it took to track and wait. It was a way for me to switch off from all the noise back in town. This trip was a bit last minute. A buddy of mine had mentioned he'd seen good-sized elk sign near Clearwater County, just southeast of a little place called Pierce. It's tucked between miles of forest, creeks, and mountains that roll into nothing for hundreds of miles. I had a few days off, packed my rifle, gear, and my old Army surplus canvas tent, and drove my pickup down late Friday night. The plan was to set up camp near a small offshoot of Wadus Creek and spend 2 or 3 days stalking the ridgelines. I got to the area just past midnight and drove a few miles on an old logging road before pulling off onto a cleared patch near the edge of the tree line. I didn't set up the tent right away. I just slept in the truck. It was cold, but I had my sleeping bag and a thermos of coffee. By the time I woke up, frost had crept across the windshield. I stepped out, stretched my back, and took in that crisp, piney air. There was no wind, no traffic, just birds and a soft trickle of water from the creek. After a quick breakfast, I set up camp. Nothing fancy, just the canvas tent, a folding chair, a cooler, and a fire pit made of stones. I packed a day's worth of food and ammo into my field pack, slung the rifle over my shoulder, and hiked out west toward a small ridgeline I'd seen on my GPS. The woods were thick with lodgepole pine, and there were game trails weaving through the underbrush. I saw fresh elk tracks, some scat, and what looked like scrapes on a few tree trunks. I spent all day out there without firing a shot. The sun dipped down early that time of year, and the cold started creeping in around 5. I got back to camp as the light faded, started a fire, and heated up a can of stew. I didn't see another soul out there. That was something I liked, but it also made you feel small. Just a man in a tent, miles from the nearest house or store. That first night, I slept hard. No animals.
No estrange noises.
Just silence. The next morning was the same routine. Up at dawn, coffee, hike out deeper into the woods. I found more elk sign, but nothing close enough to take a shot. I saw a black bear at one point, a good 200 yards off, just lumbering through some huckleberry bushes. I watched him for a while and moved on. Around mid-afternoon, clouds started rolling in, and the temperature dropped faster than I liked. I knew weather could change quickly up there, and I decided to head back early. When I got back to camp that day, something felt off. It wasn't anything huge, just little things. My folding chair was knocked over, and one of the firewood logs I'd stacked beside the pit was about 10 feet away, like someone had tossed it. At first, I thought maybe an animal had come through. A raccoon, maybe, or something larger like a coyote. I checked the ground around camp, but the forest floor was too thick with needles and debris to pick up any clear prints. That night, I built the fire higher and kept my rifle closer than usual. I sat outside for a while with a blanket around my shoulders, just watching the dark tree line. Every now and then, I thought I heard movement, but that's not uncommon in the woods. Trees creak, animals move, and your mind fills in the blanks. I turned in around 10 and left the fire smoldering low. At some point that night, I woke up sweating. The temperature had dropped below freezing, but the inside of my tent felt hot. I pulled off my sleeping bag and just lay there listening. The canvas flapped softly from wind, but something else felt strange, like the air itself was pressing in on me. I didn't hear anything out of place, but the hair on the back of my neck was up. I reached over, grabbed the flashlight and the rifle, and unzipped the tent. I didn't see anything at first, just the dying fire, the chair where I left it, my cooler sitting where I'd pushed it against a log. But then I noticed the edge of the tent fly had been moved. It had been unhooked and peeled back like someone was trying to peek inside. I hadn't touched it since I set it up. The rest of the camp was untouched, but that one little detail bothered me more than anything else. I stood outside for a good 30 minutes, scanning the woods, listening for crunches or footsteps, but nothing came. Eventually, I zipped the tent back up and tried to get more sleep, but it didn't come easy. The next morning, I packed up camp quicker than I normally would have. I told myself it was the weather. It was supposed to snow that night, and the sky was already dull and heavy, but deep down, I just didn't want to be out there anymore. I had a gut feeling, and I've learned not to ignore those. On the drive back toward the highway, I came across a downed tree across the road. Not massive, but big enough that I couldn't get the truck past without a saw. That was odd. The tree looked fresh, still green inside, and there hadn't been enough wind to explain it falling. I got out, pulled the saw from the toolbox in the bed, and started cutting through. As I worked, I kept glancing into the trees. I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. When I finally cleared the path and tossed the last chunk of trunk to the side, I stood for a moment, sweating even though it was near freezing. That's when I noticed fresh boot prints in the mud beside the road. Not mine. These were newer, bigger, deeper. They went into the woods and disappeared. I didn't follow them. I just got back in the truck, locked the doors, and drove the rest of the way to the highway without stopping. It wasn't until I got home and unpacked that I realized my hunting knife was missing. I kept it in a leather sheath attached to my belt. It must have fallen off when I was packing up, or so I thought. But when I checked my bag, I found something else. Tucked inside my pack, where I kept my food, was a small length of paracord I didn't remember bringing. It was tied in a loop, like a snare, but cruder. I stared at it for a long time before tossing it in the trash. I never told anyone about it. What would I say? I didn't go hunting again that year. The snow came early, and work got busy. But even now, years later, I still think about that trip. The way that flap was pulled back. The prints beside the road. The way the air felt like it was pressing down on me that night in the tent. It wasn't ghosts. It wasn't a monster. It was something much more real. Person. Someone else was out there watching me. And the scariest part is, I have no idea how close they got. I was in the middle of nowhere with no cell signal, no backup, no neighbors. Just trees, shadows, and a canvas tent. I still hunt sometimes, but I don't go out alone anymore, and I never ever camp near Wadus Creek again. It was the summer of 2006. I was 32 years old at the time and had been going through a rough stretch. I just moved out of a long relationship, and everything in my apartment reminded me of the life I thought I'd built with someone. I needed space. I needed silence. So I packed my old Toyota pickup with camping gear, a cooler, and my rifle, and I headed out to Oregon's backcountry for a few days of peace, and air so clean it felt sharp in your lungs. I didn't have a specific place in mind. I'd done this kind of solo trip a few times before, and I knew how to find a decent spot. I took a series of Forest Service roads just past the Deschutes National Forest, north of La Pine. I passed a couple of trailheads and a few scattered campsites before veering off onto a narrow dirt road that seemed forgotten. It wasn't on any of my maps. There were no signs. The trees were thick here, mostly pines and firs. Moss hung from some of them like they hadn't been touched in decades. The road got rough, full of dips and small rocks. My tires kicked up clouds of dry dust that hung in the still air behind me. After maybe 45 minutes of slow crawling, I found a clearing. It wasn't anything special, but it was flat, secluded, and silent. It sat about 20 yards off the road, shielded by dense trees on three sides, with the last side opening slightly downhill toward a dry streambed. There was no cell signal.
No noise.
No one else. That was the appeal. I killed the engine and just sat there for a few minutes, listening to the ticking of the engine as it cooled down. I pitched my tent about 15 feet from the truck, facing the slope. I laid out my tarp, sleeping bag, and gear in practiced movements. I built a fire pit with some stones I found nearby, chopped some kindling from a dead log with the hatchet I kept in the truck, and got a fire going before the lights slipped away. As the sun dropped behind the trees, the air turned cool, then cold. I threw on a flannel shirt and a beanie and cracked open a beer from the cooler. I didn't have much of a plan. Just stay a couple of nights, read, maybe fish if I found a creek with water. I felt more peace in that first hour than I had in weeks. That night I slept fine. Not great, but fine. The kind of sleep where you drift in and out, half waking at every small rustle or gust of wind. The forest is alive even at night. You hear it. Branches creaking, needles falling, small animals moving through the brush. It never fully goes quiet, and that's normal. That's part of it. But in the early morning, around 4, I think, I woke up because it went silent. Completely. No wind. No small animals. Not even distant bird calls. That kind of silence in a forest is unnatural. It's the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're being watched. I laid still in my bag, staring up at the roof of the tent. I could hear my own breathing. My heart beat loud in my ears. I stayed like that for a long while until a low gust picked up and the normal sounds gradually came back. I told myself it was nothing, just nerves, maybe. Maybe I was more tightly wound than I thought. The next day I wandered a bit. I followed the slope down past the dried stream bed and into some low brush. I found old tire tracks down there, faint but visible. It looked like someone had driven a four-wheeler or a dirt bike through the area at some point. Not recently, but not decades ago either. I didn't think much of it. People explore. Hunters pass through places like this all the time. Still, I kept my rifle slung over my shoulder even though I wasn't planning to use it that day. By the second night, I'd settled in. Made another fire, ate cold beans and crackers, watched the sky turn black above me. The stars out here were unreal. No light pollution. I could see the Milky Way stretching across the sky like a faint scar. I sat there until the fire burned low and the cold pushed me into my tent. But again, that same feeling hit me around 4 in the morning. This time, I wasn't asleep. I'd been tossing around in my bag, trying to get comfortable. 1 minute, I was listening to an owl in the trees. The next, the owl stopped and so did everything else. Just like the night before, dead silence. The kind that presses against your ears. I laid still again, muscles tight, skin cold even inside the bag. I waited for the wind, for a crack of branches, for anything. Then I heard footsteps, not from an animal, not four-legged. Slow, crunching steps on the forest floor, maybe 50 feet from the tent, somewhere near the dry stream bed. I could hear them because the rest of the forest had gone silent again. They weren't rushing, just slow, even steps. A pause, then another step, then nothing. I stayed in that bag until daylight. I didn't sleep. I didn't breathe heavy. I didn't move. When the sun started to rise and the birds returned, I unzipped the tent and stepped out into the cold. Everything looked normal. No sign of animals or people. No prints that I could find. I even walked out toward where I'd heard the steps, rifle in hand, scanning the trees and the brush. Nothing. No broken branches, no torn grass, no sign of anything unusual. But the feeling didn't go away. It hung on me like sweat that wouldn't dry. I told myself I'd stay one more night. I'd driven too far, and I didn't want to pack up just because of nerves. I spent the rest of the day keeping busy, gathering wood, fishing at a creek a few miles down the trail. I didn't catch anything. When I got back to camp around 5, the first thing I noticed was my tarp. I always drape it over my cooler during the day to keep the sun off it. It was folded, neatly, like someone had picked it up and laid it down perfectly square. I hadn't done that. I never folded things like that while camping. It felt too precise, too deliberate. I looked around. Still no signs. No tracks, no broken branches. Just that feeling like I wasn't alone. That night, I didn't light a fire. I sat in the truck instead, doors locked, rifle across my lap. I left the tent zipped but empty, hoping that if anyone was watching, they'd think I was in it. I stayed like that for hours, engine off, windows cracked, just waiting. Around 3:30 in the morning, I saw movement, a figure, between the trees near the slope. Just one person, I think, tall, wearing something dark. They didn't have a flashlight and they didn't speak. They stood for maybe a minute, just watching the tent. Then they turned and walked back into the trees, slow and steady, like they had all the time in the world. I didn't sleep that night either. When the sun came up, I didn't waste a second. I packed everything, threw it into the truck bed without folding or organizing. I didn't eat, didn't check the site, didn't look around. I just drove. Fast. Every bump in that old dirt road jarred my bones. But I didn't care. I wanted out. I wanted paved roads and other people. I drove straight to Bend and got a cheap motel for the night. Took the first hot shower I'd had in days. Locked the door. Double-checked the windows. I stayed there 2 nights just to let my nerves settle. A week later, I looked up news from that area. Nothing. No missing people, no crimes, no reports of strange activity. Just blank, boring normal. But I've camped for 20 years in all kinds of places, and I've never had a trip that felt like that. I don't know who that person was. Maybe a drifter. Maybe someone with a cabin deeper in the woods. Maybe someone who didn't like visitors. I never went back to that part of Oregon. And I never will. Some places don't want to be found. Some places watch you while you sleep. And if you feel that silence creeping in while you're out in the woods, if it gets too quiet, don't ignore it. Pack your things. Go home while you still can. It was the summer of 2013 when I made one of the dumbest decisions of my life. I was 26 back then, living in a small town in northern Georgia, not far from the edge of the Chattahoochee National Forest. I'd recently quit a dead-end warehouse job and had this feeling in my chest like something needed to shake me out of the rut I was in. I wasn't looking for some life-changing experience, just something different, something strange. Something that would put a mark on my memory. I used to go camping alone pretty often, never deep into the wilderness, just small trips where I'd drive out to some quiet place with my gear, set up camp, and stay a night or two. I didn't even carry a gun. I liked the isolation, the silence, the way time slowed down when you had nothing but your own thoughts and a fire. That summer, I got a weird idea stuck in my head. I had been looking through old maps online, just curious, really, and I came across a dot marked as Church Cemetery, way out in the hills north of Talladega. It wasn't on modern GPS maps. I found it through an old 1986 topographical scan someone had uploaded to a backwater forum about forgotten places in Georgia. No other info, just a dot labeled with tiny text. That's all it took to hook me. I started researching it more. County archives, message boards, local history blogs. Not much came up, which only made it more interesting. From what I could piece together, it was once part of a small community of miners back in the late 1800s. The church burned down sometime in the 1930s, and the last burial had taken place in the early 40s. After that, nothing. No records, no photos, no restoration efforts, like it had just been erased. So I decided I'd go camp there. I had to piece together my own route using the old map and newer terrain overlays. I figured I'd park near an old logging road about 20 miles north of Talladega, then hike a few miles through the forest until I hit the ridge where the cemetery was supposed to be. I didn't expect it to be impressive. Maybe just some broken stones, a rusted fence, a few sunken graves, but I liked the idea of camping somewhere forgotten. It felt like a kind of quiet rebellion against the digital world we live in. I packed my gear, tent, sleeping bag, food, water, first aid kit, folding shovel, flashlight, and a backup battery for my phone. I also brought a compass and the printed maps, just in case. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I lived alone and didn't have many close friends at the time, so it wasn't like anyone would notice I was gone for a day or two. It took a couple of hours to drive to the spot where I parked. The road was rough and barely maintained, and by the time I got there, it was already mid-afternoon. I locked my car, threw on my pack, and started hiking. The forest was thick, pines mostly, mixed with patches of oak and poplar. The air was heavy and warm. Every now and then, I'd cross an old trail or a stump that looked like it had been cut decades ago. But there were no signs of people. No trash, no markers, not even boot prints. It felt like I was slipping into a piece of the past with every step. It took me about 2.5 hours to get to the ridge. I found it not because of any sign or marker, but because the land rose in a gentle slope and leveled out into a flat patch about the size of a football field. The trees thinned out slightly at the top, and the light opened up just enough for me to see something strange through the underbrush. Stone. Not a lot. Just a few jagged bits poking out of the dirt like broken teeth. I walked around carefully. The earth was uneven, soft in some spots, almost like it was sinking. I started seeing more stones. Some were marked, most were blank or too worn to read. A couple of them leaned so far to the side that I wasn't sure if they were headstones or just rocks that had been cut and left behind. I found it. There was no fence, no path, no sign that anyone had been here in decades. Just the quiet hum of bugs, the sway of trees, and those crooked stones scattered across the clearing. I picked a spot near the edge of the cemetery to set up camp, about 15 yards from the nearest grave. It felt wrong to get closer than that. Even though I don't believe in ghosts or spirits, there was still something about the place that made me want to keep a respectful distance. I set up the tent, started a small fire with dry wood I gathered, and heated up a can of chili. As the sun sank lower, the trees cast long shadows across the graves, stretching like fingers across the ground. The forest around me went still in that strange way it does right before night takes over. No birds, no breeze, no nothing. Just stillness. It was around 9 p.m. when things started feeling off. I was sitting near the fire, flipping through the paper map again, just killing time before bed, when I heard something out in the trees. A quick, sharp rustle, too heavy for a squirrel or raccoon. I froze, listening. Then silence. I thought maybe it was a deer, but it didn't sound like that. It wasn't the steady crush of hooves. It was short, jittery, like a footstep and then sudden stillness. I waited. 10 minutes. Nothing. I tried to shake it off, but my body was already tense. The firelight felt too small, like it didn't reach far enough. I didn't have a gun with me, just a camping knife, and I started regretting that. I climbed into the tent and zipped it shut. My flashlight was beside me, and I left it on for a bit while I lay on the sleeping bag, staring at the nylon ceiling. I told myself it was nothing, a branch falling, an animal passing by, but my gut kept twisting. Somewhere around midnight, I woke up, not from a sound, but from a feeling, like something had changed, the kind of thing your body notices before your brain does. I sat up and grabbed the flashlight. The tent was quiet. I unzipped the flap just enough to peek out. The fire was dead, but that wasn't what made my stomach drop. There were footprints, fresh ones, right outside the tent. Not deep, just soft impressions in the dirt where someone had walked around the camp.
Nos shoes.
Barefoot. I counted 3 for steps, and then they disappeared into the darkness near the graves. I stayed frozen for maybe 5 minutes. My mouth was dry. I didn't move, didn't breathe heavy, just listened. Nothing. Then I heard it. A cough. Soft, dry, human, not far from the cemetery stones. That's when I started to panic. I pulled on my boots inside the tent, grabbed the flashlight and knife, and crawled out as quietly as I could. I didn't call out or yell. I didn't want to make noise. I just kept the light low and scanned the clearing. Nobody. I walked slowly around the camp, then toward the cemetery. The flashlight beam jumped over the stones. Some of them looked different, more upright, more defined, like they hadn't looked that way earlier. I felt like my brain was trying to fight me, telling me I was misremembering. Stress, maybe. I told myself that. I circled the graves. Nothing. No sign of a person. No tracks deeper in the trees. But my skin was crawling. I knew someone had been there. I knew it. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat up in my tent with the flashlight on, knife in hand, listening to every sound outside. Nothing more happened, but the night stretched on like it would never end. When the first hint of light crept into the sky, I packed up fast. I didn't eat, didn't even douse the fire properly, just kicked dirt over it and shoved everything into my pack. As I turned to leave the clearing, I looked back once more at the graves. That's when I saw it. One of the headstones, one I swore was blank the day before, had something scratched into it. Fresh, still white from the cut. It was a name.
** Michael L.
That's my name. I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't carved with tools, just scraped into the soft surface. Jagged and shallow, like someone had done it with a rock or a knife. I backed away and started down the ridge without another glance. The hike back felt longer. Every sound in the forest made me jump. I didn't stop to rest, didn't stop for water. I reached my car just after 10 a.m., got inside, locked the doors, and drove home without saying a word. When I got back to my apartment, I took a long shower and sat in the living room staring at the wall for hours. I couldn't explain any of it. I still can't. I didn't report it. Who would I even report it to? What would I say? A few days later, I went back to the forum where I'd found the map. The post was gone, deleted. The whole thread was wiped. No cached version. Nothing. I never found that cemetery on any other map again. Not online, not in the library, not even in the old records at the county office. It was like it had been buried all over again. I never went camping alone after that. I don't even hike anymore, and I sure as hell don't look at old maps. Because somewhere out there, in a forest where no one goes, there's a headstone with my name on it. And someone or something put it there while I slept. It was the summer of 2017 when I took a solo camping trip to the Lake District in northern England. I was 27 at the time, working in London as a graphic designer, and I needed to get away. Too many screens, too much noise, and I felt like I was barely breathing in that city anymore. I'd gone hiking before, but never truly camped alone. Something about doing it alone felt like a challenge I needed to take on. I didn't tell many people either. My closest mate knew where I was going, but I kept it vague. That felt important, like I wanted to disappear for a bit. I picked a spot near a lesser-known lake called Loweswater. It's not as touristy as Windermere or Derwentwater, and that's exactly why I chose it. Fewer people, fewer interruptions. Just the green hills, still waters, and thick silence. I took a train to Penrith, then a bus toward Cockermouth, and finally walked a couple of miles into the forest with a decent pack on my back and a basic one-person tent. The first night was fine. It was chilly even in July, and the air smelled like wet soil and pine needles. I found a flat patch of grass near the treeline with a clear view of the lake below. I set up the tent, laid out my sleeping bag, and made a simple meal on a camping stove. I remember how quiet it was. Even the birds seemed to go silent after the sun dipped behind the hills. It was the kind of silence that pressed against your ears. I didn't sleep too well. Every little snap of a twig outside the tent felt loud and sharp. It wasn't fear, not exactly, just that I wasn't used to sleeping with only a thin layer of nylon between me and the woods. But I managed. The second day was clearer. I hiked up to the ridge and took some photos. I brought a disposable camera with me because I didn't want to stare at my phone. That day felt peaceful. I didn't see anyone else, not even at a distance. The trails were narrow and a little overgrown, and it felt like I had the whole place to myself. I was beginning to settle into it. That evening, something shifted. I was sitting near the edge of the lake, skipping stones and watching the last bit of light stretch across the surface. I didn't have a fire, just didn't want to deal with it. So I was using a headlamp and reading in the tent when I heard what sounded like footsteps. Not close, but not far. Crunching leaves. They moved slowly, like someone was trying not to make noise but wasn't doing a good job. First, I thought it could be a deer. Then I remembered I hadn't seen any signs of animals all day.
No droppings, no prints.
That stuck out now that I thought of it. I turned off my light and waited. The footsteps stopped. A few minutes passed. Then I heard it again, closer this time. Still slow, still heavy, like boots on wet earth. Stopped just outside my tent. I held my breath. My heart was hammering in my chest. So hard I thought it would be loud enough to give me away. Whoever it was didn't say anything. No torchlight, no movement. Just standing there. I didn't move. I lay completely still, hoping it was just some local farmer passing through, even though that made no sense. I was deep in the woods, away from any public path. Then the sound of retreating steps. Again slow, back into the woods. I waited for maybe an hour before I dared to move. When I finally did, I poked my head out and scanned the dark with my torch. Nothing, just the trees and my breath in the cold air. I barely slept. By morning, I convinced myself it had to be another camper. Maybe someone had taken a wrong path. I made coffee and tried to shake it off. But the third day was when things got stranger. I hiked up the other side of the lake, following a sheep trail. It was steeper and rockier than I expected. I was out of breath halfway up, but I pushed on. I came across what looked like the remains of an old stone building, maybe a shepherd's hut from long ago. The roof was gone, just the walls left standing. Moss grew thick on the stones. That's when I saw her, about 50 feet away, standing near a dead tree. She was wearing what looked like a long coat, black or dark gray, and something about the way she stood felt wrong. Her arms were stiff by her sides, and her head was tilted slightly like she was trying to listen for something. I thought maybe she was a hiker too, but she didn't move, not even when the wind picked up. She didn't look at me, didn't react at all. I kept walking slowly, watching her. She wasn't facing me fully, more turned at an angle. I passed the tree line and looked back. She was gone. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear leaves move. She was just gone. I didn't feel scared, not exactly, but I felt off. Something about the way she appeared, how still she was, it didn't sit right. Back at the tent that night, I kept the headlamp off. I listened. No footsteps this time, but I barely slept. I started to question my judgment. Maybe the isolation was messing with my mind. The next morning, I found footprints. Not mine. They were smaller, maybe a woman's or a teenager's. Barefoot. The toes were wide apart, and the arch was shallow like someone who walks barefoot often. The prints circled the tent. Once, twice, then wandered off toward the lake. I froze. My shoes were muddy, and I knew my own prints. These weren't mine. They were fresh too, still sharp at the edges. That was the moment I realized I needed to leave. I packed everything quickly, stuffed the damp tent into my pack without folding it right. I didn't eat, didn't even have water. I just wanted out. But the path back was longer than I remembered. The woods felt darker, the branches thicker. I was sweating and cold at the same time. Every few minutes I'd look over my shoulder, expecting to see her standing there. About a mile into the walk, I saw her again. She was on the path ahead of me this time, just standing, halfway turned, arms still at her sides. Her coat hung down to her ankles, and her hair was thin and messy, like it hadn't been washed in weeks. She wasn't blocking the path, but she didn't move. I stopped walking. My legs felt like they didn't belong to me. She didn't make a sound. No rustling, no breathing, nothing. Just stood there like a shadow pretending to be a person. I backed up slowly, heart racing. I took a long way around through the undergrowth, scratching my arms on branches. I didn't care. I just needed to put distance between us. When I finally reached the edge of the forest, I nearly cried. The road was empty, but it felt like safety. I walked the last few miles to the nearest village. Lampla, I think it was called. I booked a room at a small inn and slept for 10 hours straight. I never went back to get the rest of my things. The tent was cheap. The camera, the books, all of it didn't matter. I just wanted to forget. Back in London, I looked up news reports, local forums, anything. I found a few vague threads about strange things near Loweswater. Nothing official, but one stuck with me. It was a post from 2013 by some guy who said he saw a thin woman in a long coat watching him from the trees while he camped by the lake. He left the next morning and never returned.
Naughty place.
The thread was dead. It's been years, and I still think about her. I don't know what I saw. I don't know why she was there or why she didn't speak or move, but it felt human, not supernatural. That's what makes it worse. She was real. She chose to be there, and she watched me sleep. Whatever her reason was, I don't want to know. I haven't gone camping since.